Welcome back to the second hour of our program. I just, apropos of our last hour, and then we'll get to Jamal Abdi in just a moment, but apropos of our last hour, Dynasty Shadrealm just tweeted to me. He said, Tom, what I feel Democrats haven't done, reparations, African Americans listed as a protected class, police reform, African American contracts for construction and other projects in their community. Police reform, as I pointed out, is something that's on, big on the screen of the Democratic Party, and in fact is moving forward very rapidly in California. But nationally, yeah, I haven't seen that much, and I think that's a pretty good list as a starting point. But, let's also talk about Iran. I closed the last hour, or toward the end of the last hour, quoting a tweet from Donald Trump in 2011 when Barack Obama was about to run for re-election. And he tweeted, in order to get elected, Barack Obama will start a war with Iran. So Donald Trump, back in 2011, 7 years ago, was thinking, gee, for an American politician to get reelected in the United States, one of the best things he could do is have a war with Iran. And if he didn't think that was something that would be successful politically, he wouldn't attribute it to Barack Obama, right? I mean, it's kind of rational. So, Trump has already told us how he thinks about this, that war with Iran is a good thing in terms of politics. I'm curious Jamal Abdi's thoughts on this. He's the Vice President for Policy at NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, and the Executive Director of NIAC Action. The website, niac.org, and and you can tweet him at jabdi, A-B-D-I. Jamal, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back, Tom.
So, what is your take on my take about Donald Trump's 2011 tweet, and how does that inform your thinking on what Trump is up to right now, and what's your analysis of the current state of affairs? Is this all bluster, or could we be looking down the barrel of World War III? There's a lot there. Feel free to go off.
So we're spending a lot of time trying to assess the motivations behind this, and of course other actions by this president. And it's always, a matter of not wanting to fall into a trap of actually thinking that there's a strategy behind some of this stuff. And so for this, I don't know if this was coordinated, if this was planned out, or if this was a spur of the moment decision that he made. This tweet came on the heels of a speech by his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in California, aimed at Iranian Americans. He invited Iranian Americans to attend the speech. It was at the Reagan Library, where he was effectively making the case for regime change without saying regime change, and actually, actively saying, we don't seek regime change, we just seek all of these changes in the regime. And I'm now speaking to an audience of Iranian Americans and dissidents and people like that. And so for this to come right after that, it feels like it's part of a coordinated move. John Bolton, who I think he and Pompeo are similarly hawkish about Iran. Pompeo, I think, is a little bit more practical, whereas Bolton is more ideological and has been advocating for bombing Iran very explicitly for years. And then you have Mattis, who is also with Pompeo in California, who is against going to war with Iran. He wants to challenge Iran in other ways. And so what I'm trying to figure out here is, the day after this tweet came out, John Bolton went to great lengths to reiterate that this was the president's position, and he went and did press on the tweet itself instead of trying to walk it back or explain away why the president would do this. He was really emphasizing this. And to me, that means that John Bolton may be the one behind this, trying to get this president to take a more provocative position towards Iran.
Bolton, who editorialized in the Washington Post a year or three ago that the best way to stop Iran from having a bomb is to bomb Iran.
Yes. One of the few people, there are many people in Washington who want to go in that direction. He's one of the rare people who will actually say it publicly, which I appreciate him for. But to get to what you're talking about, sort of the political dimensions of this, I mean, there's a lot of speculation. There's some wag the dog going on where he's got numerous scandals involving Russia and his lawyer and all these other things.
Well, so does Bibi Netanyahu, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, they both have a strong incentive to change the conversation away from the crimes that they're both being charged with.
Yeah, yes. And, you know, I think Trump is a student of politics, maybe not an A student, but he's got a knack. And I think he knows what this type of, this preparation for war would do for him politically. But I really think that there's sort of some back and forth going on inside the White House about sort of what this Iran policy actually is. They're rolling it out as they're sort of figuring out what the end game is, I think.
At the same time, Pompeo in his speech talked about how corrupt the current Iranian government is, how the Grand Ayatollah has amassed billions of dollars and stashed it offshore, that a number of these people are, who rule the country are basically kleptocrats. How are the Iranian, first of all, is there truth to that? And secondly, what's the best way to deal with that? I get it. It's really none of our business how Iran runs its own internal affairs until it starts, interfering with us. But what does? Well, I guess I've asked my question. Toss it back to you.
Well, what Pompeo said, some of it was exaggerated, much of it was true. The question is the messenger. I mean, this is an administration that cares about the leaders of government benefiting from their service. I think they need to look in the mirror. And then, they want to talk about human rights and all these other things. Well, we are cozying up with some of the greatest abusers of human rights in the region. So I think these points are true, and actually these are points that resonate with Iranians, which is, I think very much calculated by Pompeo and the administration as the reason for going out with this messaging, even though it rings so hypocritical when you look at what all they're doing. But, there were protests in Iran at the end of last year. There have been some ongoing protests, mostly about the economy. But what really triggered them or helped trigger them was the revelation of how much of the Iranian budget is going to these private foundations of some of the clerics and the religious leaders and things like that. And so when these revelations have come out, this is actually something that does mobilize Iranians who are not doing well economically to come out against the government.
Does it mobilize them to, in a way that would be productive, like, Americans saying, hey, look at how Jeff Bezos is now the richest man in the world, and yet a third of his employees in California or in Arizona or wherever it was are on food stamps. And maybe we should legislatively do something about that, like forcing a raise in the minimum wage or allowing unions. That seems like a productive response as opposed to an unproductive response, which would be, I'm furious about this, just tear the thing down, right? And which leads to chaos and that sort of thing.
Right, absolutely. And then the other dynamic here is it's not as if, an American news source or some trusted, journalist is coming out and saying this is a political tool. This is as if, Putin or, Ayatollah Khamenei came out with this line about Bezos and or about corruption in the American system, precisely to destabilize the system, not to actually come up with any solution to it. So really, what this does, by co-opting this message that is resonant among some of the opposition in Iran, the U.S. is really taking that away from them. It's very hard to organize around these things if it is, rightly perceived as being something orchestrated by an outside, foreign government, which is sensitive in any context, but particularly in Iran and the lessons of U.S. interventions in the region, not to mention, the U.S. toppling of the democratically elected prime minister in Iran in '53. So this is very self-serving. I don't think it actually does anything positive for the people of Iran or even the opposition.
So this is probably hurting the reformers. And would you consider Rouhani a reformer rather than helping them?
Would I consider him a reformer? I think he's a moderate. He's not really a true member of the reformists, but he kind of balances between the different factions and definitely has trended that way on certain issues. Yeah,
fascinating. So what can Americans do to prevent war with Iran, assuming that that's a desirable thing, to prevent a war?
Well, the silver lining here is that, once the cat's out of the bag, we can actually organize against it. So I was watching this campaign unfold of regime change and setting the stage for something really ugly. And if it's happening in private, it's hard to actually get people mobilized around it. So at this point in time, we need lawmakers to be hearing from their constituents about how disturbed and upset they are by this, and express their hope that lawmakers will actually push back against it. And already we are hearing a lot of members of Congress pushing back against the tweet, but we need to make this a political loss for the president and for anybody who's advocating for military action or U.S.-led regime change in Iran or anywhere else, frankly.
Yeah, sounds like a solid thing. Jamal Abdi is the Vice President for Policy at the National Iranian American Council, NIAC. NIAC.org is the website. Jamal, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
I appreciate an in-depth conversation. It's very, very considerate of you. Thank you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day, your calls, and my thoughts on all the above in just a moment.